Picture this. Two men stand facing each other. Each holds a gun pointed at the other's head, and both know whoever fires first dies, because the other will pull the trigger before he falls. So they just stand there for 45 years. That was the Cold War. Not a metaphor. Literally, two nations pointing thousands of nuclear missiles at each other. 45 years of balancing on the edge of an abyss that neither one fell into. How it started, how it worked, and why it ended the way it did today. 1945. The Second World War is over. The USSR, the United States, and Great Britain won together. But to call their alliance friendship would be a lie. Churchill had hated the Bolsheviks since 1917. He personally organized the Allied intervention in Russia during the Civil War. His alliance with the USSR in 1941 was pure pragmatism. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Stalin did not trust his Western allies for a single second. And then the war ended. The common enemy was destroyed, and a new conflict began immediately. Wait, have you ever heard of Operation Unthinkable? Spring 1945. Germany has not yet surrendered, and the British military staff is already drawing up plans for a military strike against Soviet forces in Europe. Churchill was considering arming German prisoners of war and throwing them against the Red Army. German prisoners of war who had just been defeated against yesterday's allies. This is not a theory. This is a documented fact. The Soviet Union learned about the plan in the summer of 1945 through intelligence, through the Cambridge 5 spy ring. Stalin drew his conclusions. March 5, 1946, the small American town of Fulton. Churchill, no longer prime minister, having lost the election, had come to the United States to give lectures and delivered a speech that divided the world into before and after. President Truman sat beside him. Churchill said it plainly, quote, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent." Totalitarianism had not disappeared with the Nazis. It had simply changed its face. The new threat was the USSR. The Soviet press erupted. Stalin compared Churchill to Hitler. Former allies became enemies. Officially. August 29, 1949, the Kazakh Steppe. The Soviet Union detonates its first nuclear bomb. In the West, shock. It had been assumed that the USSR would need at least the mid-1950s. Its economy was too devastated, its science too far behind. They were wrong by several years, and by 1953, the Soviet Union tests a hydrogen bomb. The Americans had tested theirs a year earlier, in 1952, and again they hoped, surely this time we are ahead. And again, no. The arms race was becoming madness. By the late 1960s, each side had enough nuclear warheads to destroy humanity several times over. Why several times? Good question. No one could explain. 1948. Berlin, sitting in the middle of the Soviet occupation zone. But the western part of the city belongs to the Americans, the British, and the French. The USSR seals off all the roads. West Berlin is surrounded, cut off. 2 million people without food or fuel. What do the Americans do? They build an airlift, planes landing every 90 seconds around the clock for almost a year. 2.3 tons of supplies, bread, coal, medicine, everything delivered by air. The USSR backs down. The blockade is lifted, but Berlin remains a divided city. And in 1961, straight through streets, through courtyards, through the walls of buildings, a wall goes up. The Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain made physical, concrete, and barbed wire. It will stand for 28 years. October 9, 1962. An American reconnaissance aircraft photographs Cuba. The images show Soviet nuclear missiles pointed at the United States. Washington is 150 kilometers away. President Kennedy announces a naval blockade of the island. Soviet ships carrying more missiles are headed toward Cuba. American warships take up position across their path. The distance between them shrinks. The entire world holds its breath. In bunkers on both sides of the ocean, fingers hover over buttons. And here something happened that rarely gets talked about. Soviet B-59, underwater, no contact with Moscow, a nuclear torpedo on board. American ships begin dropping depth charges, signal charges, not live ones, to force the submarine to surface. But the crew does not know they are signal charges. Captain Savitsky shouts, "We are going to fight. We will die, but we will sink them all." He is ready to launch the nuclear torpedo. Under the rules, 3 officers must agree for the launch to proceed. 2 say yes. The third, Vasily Arkhipov, says no. 1 man, 1 refusal, quite possibly the single decision that saved the world from nuclear war. Within days, Khrushchev and Kennedy reach an agreement. Soviet missiles leave Cuba. American missiles leave Turkey. The world exhales. 1965. The United States enters Vietnam. Officially, to stop the spread of communism. In reality, they walk into a trap they cannot escape for 10 years. The USSR supplies North Vietnam with weapons and advisors. The United States loses nearly 60,000 men killed. American society fractures, anti-war protests, burning flags, soldiers refusing to fight. 1975, the United States withdraws. Vietnam reunifies under the red flag. 1979, the Soviet Union enters Afghanistan, officially to fulfill its internationalist duty. In reality, it walks into a trap it cannot escape for 10 years. The United States supplies Afghan mujahideen with weapons and money. The Soviet Union loses, by official figures, 15,000 men killed. Soviet society begins asking uncomfortable questions. 1989, the Soviet Union withdraws. Afghanistan is left in ruins. History rhymes. 1983, President Reagan announces the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars. The idea: build a space-based shield that intercepts any Soviet missiles before they reach the United States. The Soviet Union panics. A response must be developed. Money must be spent, enormous amounts of money. But there is no money. Oil prices are falling. The economy is creaking. The arms race is draining the last resources. Reagan knew this. Star Wars was not simply a military program, it was an economic weapon. The goal forced the USSR to spend money it didn't have, and it worked. 1985, a new general secretary arrives in the Kremlin, Mikhail Gorbachev, 55 years old, energetic, thoughtful, willing to acknowledge what his predecessors had refused to admit. The USSR is losing. Not on the battlefield, in economics, in technology, in the standard of living of its people. Gorbachev travels to meet Reagan. Reagan, a committed anti-communist who had called the USSR an evil empire, sits down across from him, and 2 men who were supposed to hate each other begin to talk, like human beings. In 1987, they sign a treaty eliminating intermediate-range nuclear missiles. The first treaty in history that did not limit weapons, but destroyed them. November 9, 1989, Berlin. A radio announcement. The borders are open. Thousands of Berliners pour into the streets. They pick up hammers, crowbars. their bare hands, and they begin tearing down the wall. The very wall that took 28 years to build. The wall that people were shot trying to cross. The wall that divided families, cities, countries. It comes down in a single night. This is the end of the Cold War in Europe. December 25, 1991, Moscow, the Kremlin. Mikhail Gorbachev addresses the nation on television. He announces his resignation. Above the Kremlin, the red Soviet flag is lowered. The Russian tricolor is raised in its place. One of the two superpowers no longer exists. The Cold War is over. On February 1, 1992, Boris Yeltsin and George H.W. Bush sign a declaration in black